What is up, podcast land? Welcome to another episode of the Two Dates and a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler. And before I introduce my buddy, Russ Hittle, I'm going to first tell everybody where they can hear the podcast. Pretty much anywhere. Anywhere there's a podcast site, you can probably find Two Dates and a Dash. Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Podbean, wherever else you listen to podcasts, you can find Two Dates and a Dash. If you want to learn more about me personally and my book, A Brother's Love, a Memoir, you can go to mattcubbler.com. And if you also want to go to the podcast section, you can find video and audio of all 86 episodes so far that had been recorded. And you can peruse and listen to whichever ones you like. There's a lot of really good ones in there. Kurt Schilling, Gary Byrne, former Secret Service agent who had to testify against Bill Clinton during his impeachment. Mickey Ward, Irish Mickey Ward, the movie The Fighter was after his life. So I had tons and tons of different content that you guys can find, and I truly would appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button. That allowed me to increase my metrics and analytics, and I truly would appreciate that. So without further ado, my man, Russ Hittle, how are you, buddy?
Good, Matt. How are you?
I'm good. I see we're coming from the lair out there in Berks County.
Yeah, we're sitting here at the Steady Point Bar. It's quite a sight right about now. We're doing some renovations, so I have to pulling up floor and that kind of stuff. But it'll be back to the way it used to be.
What the hell is that thing over your shoulder? Not that, the other shoulder. What's that?
Oh, that's a black-backed jackal. I shot that in Africa. Yeah,
All right.
yeah. I got a lot of crazy stuff down here. Hunting
You don't hear that very often on podcasts, folks. Black, what's it called?
A black-backed jackal.
All right.
Yeah, it's like a South African coyote,
Okay.
basically. Yeah.
So it's not like the hyenas from
No, hyena's much larger. Yeah, I actually came across some tracks when I was in Africa hunting, and they're huge. The tracks themselves are just huge. But yeah,
I'll stick with the black jack.
the jackal. You can just call it a jackal. It's fine.
So, brother, first of all, thank you for being on the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
It's been a long time coming.
Mm-hmm.
I asked one question for every one of my guests. And the reason why I asked this one question, as a cop, you know what it's like when you're speaking to a suspect or a victim and you're trying to get them to open up.
Mm-hmm.
And the easiest way to get somebody to open up is to talk about themselves.
Oh, yeah.
And the hardest thing for me as a host is to get to know somebody with my own research. I can look up as much I want about you, and I'll come up with my own interpretation of who you are, but that may not be who you think you are or how you're feeling in this very moment. So this is why I asked this question, and I ask everybody the same one. Who is Russ Hittle?
Yeah, that's kind of a crazy question, but he's I'm just like a normal guy, but just like you, I've led a very interesting life. I'm very far from where I came from. I grew up in Norristown, 52 East Brown Street, right on the corner of Brown and Willow. And that in and of itself kind of molded me. You know, I grew up in a mixed neighborhood and saw a lot of stuff. Saw a lot of poverty. Quite a good friend of mine when I was growing up as a child. I mean, I remember going to his house and him asked me if I wanted something to eat, and he just opened up his fridge and there was like nothing in there except a half-empty container of Kool-Aid and a half-empty package of Taylor pork roll. And at that point in time, like I didn't know, like his name was Boo. I didn't know that people like that's how people lived. So that kind of opened my eyes. You know, you brought up my job, or our job, I should say. I like to refer to it as our vocation because not everybody can do this. I am the only police officer in my immediate family. I was the first My brother had a stint as a police officer. Now he works at he works at Montgomery County as a prison officer. But it was things that happened to me when I was a kid that kind of led me to go down this route, and especially to work in drug work. You know, I went to private school for my first 8 years, and my parents decided to throw me to the wolves and send me to public school. So I went to Norristown High, and it was definitely eye-opening. I was first offered cocaine on my bus in ninth grade. Scarily enough, by a detective's son from Norristown PD.
Wow.
He will remain nameless. He's no longer with us. He killed himself years ago. But and you know, my parents were always like in the book, like they always wanted me in the books, which kept me out of trouble. So like in high school, I always tell my kids, like I did 3 things. You know, I played football, I hung out with my girlfriend, and I studied. And it kind of led me to be pretty much like I kind of like list myself as an overachiever. So I played football at Norristown. I was a team captain my senior year, and you know, right after, I think I was off for 2 weeks after graduation, and I went to basic training at Fort Knox, Kentucky. You know, won some awards when I was there, and then from there I went to Fort Gordon, Georgia, to study my military occupational specialty, which was in communications. And when I came home, I guess my destiny was pretty much set. No sooner got home and got to my reserve station, and they said, "Yo, you're getting activated. You're going to Southern California with Joint Task Force 6 to do counter drug reconnaissance and surveillance," which I was like, "Well, that's pretty cool." You know, 19 years old, like, what else was I going to do? You know, so went to March Air Force Base and lived in a Quonset hut sometimes. Most of the time we were in the field, you know, living like infantrymen, looking for marijuana cultivation sites and clandestine methamphetamine labs. And I remember calling my brother from the Quonset hut the one night after we got picked up. We got a helo extraction. Had to load up all my gear and then got on his helo and flew back to the base. And I talked to my brother, and I was like, "Dude, I know exactly what I want to do," because I had this really skewed view of what a drug cop did, you know, because we were there with, I mean, DEA and U.S. Forestry and a bunch of other law enforcement agencies. That's basically who made up JTF 6. Now it's called like Joint Task Force North or something like that. So I said, "Yeah, this is what I want to do," and I guess that was God's way of being like, "Yo, man, like this is what your vocation's going to be." But I was only 19, so, and you know, testing, and I mean, I couldn't tell you how many times I took tests after the police academy and like laid out all my stuff. You know, I was like class lieutenant, and here's all the stuff I did in the military, and I changed my MOS to military police just to get more experience. And I got told so many times, like, "Russ, we love your resume. We love everything you did, but you're just too young." And I couldn't tell you how many times that happened to me. I was getting so pissed, you know. I'm like, "Damn, I just want to be a cop," you know. And then I actually had a very, I look at it now as a test in my integrity. I had tested at my police department now, Tredyffrin Township, and I was on their list. And I had also tested at Phoenixville. And I got a phone call from Phoenixville. They said, "You know, it's between you and this other guy, and want to have you come in and talk to the chief and the mayor." And I was like, okay. So I came in, and the chief, I want to say it was Calavec back
Yeah.
then. And, went through the whole spiel. You know how it is. They ask you everything, all the crazy questions, like we're arresting your mom and that kind of stuff. But he asked me a very poignant question, and it was a test of my integrity, because Joe Walton was a detective that was sitting there. And the chief was like, okay, Russ, so I'm very good friends with Paul Pennypacker, who was the chief of Tredyffrin at the time. He said, so if I hire you, get you all situated, in 6 months when Paul Pennypacker calls you, are you going to leave my police department and go to Tredyffrin? And I was just about to speak, and Joe Walton, good man, good man.
Oh, great guy.
Yeah, county detective now in Chester County. I still laugh every time I see him. But anyway, Joe was like, well, Chief, I had this discussion with Russ, which we didn't have a discussion. He said, I had this discussion with Russ, and Russ, didn't you tell me that you would have loyalty to whoever hired you first? And I said, well, with all due respect, Detective Walton, I don't think that was me you had that conversation with. And I looked at him, I said, Chief, listen, somebody's going to offer me, $40,000 more a year to be a police officer, I'm going to have to go. And Chief Calavec, I mean, I'm sure you remember him. He was
Oh, I do.
kind of he was a gruff dude, and he was like, well, I guess this interview's over. And I said, well, I guess it is, sir. I'm not going to lie. I mean, and that's one of the things. Like, I'm not going to lie. And I was held on to my integrity, and that's something my dad instilled in me years and years ago. Along with some leadership qualities. But then I kept testing, even though I was on the list for Tredyffrin, and I tested with Norristown, and I'd made it through their selection process. I interviewed with their entire board, including Oscar Vance, who was one of my instructors at the police academy. And everybody on the board seemed to be really happy that I was a hometown guy, and they were like, well, how would you, you get all those questions. They're like, well, how would you feel if you had to arrest one of your friends? Which is, it wouldn't have been too far from the truth, because, unfortunately, I've had to do investigations on friends. And I gave, the right answer. Like, I mean, it was a true answer. Like, it's my job. I took an oath, and I always, I always held my oath, and I still do to this day, like, very, very solemnly. I've been asked by defense attorneys about me taking an oath, why I close my eyes when I take my oath, because it's more like a prayer to me than anything else. We're all human. We all fall short, but it's something that I've always done, and it means so much to me. But yeah, man, you take that oath, and you go up there, and you do your job, and sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's hard to suck it up and say, you know what? Yeah, I messed that one up, and I'm not going to lie about it. I'm going to tell you the truth. And I've sat in front of a jury and in front of a judge and said the same thing. Hey, listen, you know what? Ben's got a good point. Yeah, I screwed up on that one. But Dad always told me it takes a real man to admit when he made a mistake. So, but yeah, man, I mean, Tredyffrin had kind of happened. It took a long time, actually. I guess in a grand scheme of things, it really didn't take long. But for me, as a young guy, like, I really wanted to work. So I pulled some strings with a friend of mine, and I got hired at Montgomery County as a sheriff's deputy, which is probably like the worst 6 months of my life.
Heard that
Man,
one.
I was never so happy when I left that place. I mean, I really wasn't. I couldn't have got any happier. But you know what I did, though? I always worked and continued to better myself. So when I was given an opportunity for my reserve unit to go to SRT school, which is Special Response Team School, down at Fort McClellan, Alabama, and knowing the selection process, I was like, I got to do this. Because, like, I mean, what police department wouldn't hire somebody who's already, certified in SWAT? Here's a new cop, and he's coming in as an SRT officer. So I went through 2 weeks of hell in McClellan in July. and came back to Montgomery County as a sheriff's deputy. And man, the day I got the phone call from Chief Pennypacker to come in because he wanted to sit down and talk to me, I was never so happy. So yeah, March of '99, I got sworn in at Tredyffrin, and this year we started my my 21st year. A lot of cases, a lot of schools since then, a lot of arrests, shootings, things that on the job change you as a person. And I think about like some of those times, had a bad car wreck in '02 where I got flown down to the hospital, University of Penn, and I was only 3 years on the job. And thinking about your mortality then, my wife was pregnant with my twin sons at the time. Thinking to myself, man, I left my kids they're not even born yet. I left them. And then 2004 was involved in a shooting with a bank robber. And once again, I mean, it was, you think about like how fragile life is, and we see it, on crashes and even accidents. Like you like somebody falls off a roof. You're like, wow, like that poor guy like left his house today. He was probably thinking about, man, when he leaves his job site, he's going to have a couple beers when he gets home, and now he's gone. He's gone. And
let me jump in here real quick.
Yeah, brother.
We've got a lot of stuff to undo here as far as information. I want to start to part and parcel this a little bit so that people can really dive into the major aspects of how you became who you are, how you became successful in law enforcement, successful as an entrepreneur. Growing up in Pottstown. So Pottstown, for people that don't know this area of Pennsylvania, there's two boroughs in Montgomery County that are pretty much the shitstorms, and Norristown and Pottstown. You're looking at Pottstown's finest and Norristown's finest. So growing up in that environment is, I tell people it's the greatest education you can possibly get. Growing up especially when you're growing up with multi-race, multicultural, multiple socioeconomic levels, all within your street or a couple blocks, and definitely within your town. And how that helps. When people tell me ask me why I'm a good cop, I always say it's because I grew up in Pottstown. The things I've experienced in my life, just as a young kid, many of the things that you mentioned, helped me see the world through a different lens. And while I have obviously become more experienced and more understanding of how the world works through my military and air marshals and travel and all the things that collectively we've done to make us better human beings and growing and evolving, it all goes back to the base root of where I grew up. So let's talk about Norristown and how growing up in that town and experiencing the things you've experienced as a white male, because it's different. Everybody's got their version of how they grew up, but growing up as a white guy in Pottstown, when I grew up, I was a minority in my high school. And there's nothing wrong with that. I was happy about it. I was good with it. Some of my greatest friends were Black and Hispanic, and but it's just different being a white guy growing up in a predominantly ethnic area. Let's talk about that.
Not so much my school. I mean, because statistically, I think back then they would say that Norristown was like 30% African American. But a lot of the kids that I went to school with were like from Jeffersonville. Like I always laughed at people and they're like, I'm from Norristown. And I'm like, what was your zip code? And they say 19403. And I'm like, yeah, you were not from Norristown.
And that's the difference between Pottstown and Norristown. Norristown grew from, Pottstown's got Pottstown Borough, and then they got the Pottsgroves around it. And the Pottsgroves have their own school district, and Pottstown has their own. Norristown draws from the Nortons,
Yep.
which is basically this equivalent of the Pottsgrove. So
Yeah.
you had the influence of the suburban Norristown coming into your school. So
Yeah. And you know what? It was kind of like I was kind of looked down upon. I didn't have the money like those kids, you know, in Jeffersonville, West Norton, East Norton. You know, I came from, my dad was a electrician and my mom was a secretary at Montgomery Hospital. We were like lower middle class. I mean, I couldn't tell you when my dad bought his first new car, but school wise, like I kind of associated with everybody, but in my neighborhood, for me, it was hard to so much see color because of all the people that I was around. Like, you know, that's that old cliche. They're like, oh, some of my best friends are black. Well, yeah, I know that's like the Karen version of like, you know, somebody trying to,
I'm not a
you know,
racist. Right.
yeah. Please, no. But yeah, I mean, but I also saw the opposite end of that. I mean, I was subject to violence because of my color. I remember I was probably about 10 or 11. This group of kids, and they were teenagers, and I had an older brother who was 5 years older than me, and they had a problem with my older brother. And I was walking down the street with a friend of mine, and this kid, like, he picked up it was like, you know how we used to have ramps for our bicycles?
Mm-hmm.
He picks up this piece of plywood and he smashed it over my head. And he said something to the effect of, you know, mentioned the color of my skin and called me the MFer, you know. And I was just kind of like, well, that was racist, you know. But it made me, I can tell you this, it made me tougher. I would not let, that would not happen. It wouldn't happen anymore. I can guarantee you that. But you know what? I saw an ugly side of town then. And from then on, yeah, I walked differently. I thought differently. My dad always had a my dad always had a saying. He would beat it into us. My dad was a tough dude, you know. He's an infantryman, patrolman, or a platoon sergeant in the Army. And he said, you know, if I ever get a call that you were in a fight at school, he goes, you know, I better make sure that kid's like in the hospital, because like if they're not, I'm going to whoop your ass. And he was a tough man, Pennsylvania Dutchman, big dude. But yeah, I mean, Norristown's a very interesting place, and it's going through a lot of changes now. I mean, I could walk through a lot of neighborhoods and not have a problem when I was a younger kid, even in high school. Like I had no problems because I liked everybody. But you see the dirty part of it. I remember a guy, I'm not gonna say his name. I was in school and was walking down a hallway, and I just kind of happened. He was a running back, and I kind of like chatted him up a little bit. Hey, how you doing? And he like reached into his pants and he pulled out a gun and he stuck it in his locker and closed his locker. And I said, John, why you got a gun? And he was like, for protection, Russ. And I'm like, all right. Like, I didn't know. Well, it turns out he was a drug dealer. He used to run with a particular group of people. And not until after I became a police officer that I realized exactly what that group of people were. Actually, there were two groups. And I was like, holy crap. Like, I was dealing with gang members and I didn't even know it. But yeah, I mean, you were right, man. You're spot on when you say like it definitely molds you. I won't say it'll make you, but you know, because you could take good things, you could take bad things. That's like
you
when
take
I
them all in. Like
yeah.
I learned my observation skills,
Mm-hmm.
my spider senses, my
Mm-hmm.
is this person trustworthy or not trustworthy? My mistakes that I made doing the stupid shit that I did.
Yeah.
I wasn't, you know, I was telling people I fantasized about being on both sides of the fence. And part of me growing up, there was things I did that were on the other side of the fence.
Mm-hmm.
And
I gotcha.
I realized after doing those things that that's not the fence that side that I wanted to be on.
Mm-mm.
But growing up, I wanted to see both sides. And it allowed me to make my path decision that by the grace of God, I didn't get jammed up too bad. A couple times I did, but not too bad. That I was able to continue to make the right choice later on based on those learning curve decisions that I had been afforded to me. So I think growing up in those urban environments, and we're going to go all over the place with this because
That's cool.
That's where it's going. People talk about, the problems in law enforcement. People talk about all the issues that are all over the news. And I bring it down to very small, digestible bites. If you ask, we're suburban cops, right? We're not in Philadelphia.
Mm-mm.
There is a big problem in law enforcement where their hiring practices are wacky. Meaning that, when I'd say 2002, 2003, law enforcement began to have a shift where it became a professional job, where it became like a doctor or a nurse or a lawyer, when it's a blue collar calling, not a profession. And people are like, oh, what's wrong with having college degrees? And all? There's absolutely nothing wrong with having a college degree. The problem is that doesn't qualify you to be a police officer.
No.
And what's happening in law enforcement is they're making it so that only certain people are qualified to be police officers based on a hiring practice that is flawed from its onset. And I'll use my nephew as an example. My nephew is a police officer in Philadelphia. And had it not been for his dad and uncle and me, he grew up in Whippane. Went to Wissahickon High School, didn't have a whole lot of, there was no gang violence, there was no slums, there was no nothing. He grew up in a pretty sheltered world. He couldn't get hired in the suburbs because the suburbs were requiring 4 degrees and all these other added things. He only had his associate's degree and just wasn't able to compete with the guys with the 4 degrees and the military preference and all that. So he goes to Philly, which of course has lower hiring standards, and he gets hired there. Most kids that are from where he was at, that protected world and lily white bubble of suburbia that goes into the city is going to fuck up at some point in time because they're not prepared to handle that. I tell people all the time, you get 18 months tops of between the academy and field training before you're sent out on your own to be perfect.
Yep.
And when you take a kid that's got 0 life experiences, nothing to draw from, and the only thing he's prepared with is what he got in those 18 months, and you send him out into the middle of the 35th district and say, go be perfect. When people want to know why there are appearances of brutality or there's questionable police shootings or anything like that, I would venture 99.999% of those, the police officer that did it was scared to fucking death.
Oh yeah.
They weren't angry. They weren't hateful. They didn't have rage or racism in their, they were fucking afraid. And when you have nothing else to draw from, and in the only profession outside of the military where you're forced to go against your fight or flight, when everything screams, get the fuck out of there, and you're going forward because that's your job says you got to, and then you're forced to take a box that you haven't even undone yet and figure out what's inside and then try to unfuck that. And then shit goes sideways and you got nothing to draw from. That's when that happens. And nobody wants to have that conversation that we're sending. And it's not a right, wrong, or the cop wasn't prepared and that's his fault or anything. This is reality. And the reality is that if there's something that's broken in law enforcement, it's the fact that we're not hiring people that are born and built for the job. You have to have a certain level of life experience that allows you to draw upon it in order to do this job effectively. You can't by the book it. It doesn't exist. You start gray and work your way out of the gray. Like, that's life.
Yeah, there was my old chief, Andy Chambers, told me, he's like, Russ, he's like, exactly where the line is and you can walk it. Like, you walk right on the edge of it, but you do it legally and effectively. But what you're saying is absolutely true, and uh, I know it from the 21 years I've been at Tredyffrin. I've actually got videos, in-car camera videos and body cam videos of individuals from the city telling me on car stops, "You're not from around here." And I'm like, "No, I'm not." And then, we get into a conversation, you know about interpersonal communication skills and, getting what you want from an interview, a roadside interview, and trying to decipher whether or not individuals involved in criminal activity. And, I get into it and I'm like, "Yeah, and I grew up in Brown Street, in Norristown." And they're like, "Yeah, you're from the hood. All right, cool, man, cool." And it just kind of goes that way. Um, but you take that kid, like you said, your nephew from with pain, um, he could get chewed up, spit out, like especially as a young cop that hasn't had enough time to realize like what's going on. Um, I remember an officer that came from Berks County and got hired at our police department, and he said, "Yo, can you go and talk to these two dudes? Like, I think there's something going on. Do that interdiction thing," because no one knew what criminal interdiction was. And I walked up on the passenger side. And this guy walked me up on two Crips from North Carolina. He didn't see the signs. He didn't see the tattoos. I mean, the guy had a big Crip C right on his hand. And I was like, "Oh yeah," I just kind of made small talk with him so I could get out of there. Cause like, you don't know, they might pull a gun if they figure, they're going to jail. And I walked back and I was pissed. It's like, "Dude, you just walked me up on two Crips." The guy's like, "Huh?" Because they don't have a concept, they don't think it exists, they don't, the Bloods, they're like, "Bloods aren't out here." Yeah. So I start showing them pictures. Um, but yeah, I think there's not a lot of street smarts. And there is too much concentration on a 4-year degree. I do not. I have no degree. Um, I had
I couldn't
a
get hired today.
No, I couldn't either. No, no. Even with our military preference points, we could never get hired. Um, but I remember, and no offense to anybody watching the podcast, a very learned person told me one time, when it came to folks with degrees, and he used to say that even rectal thermometers have degrees. And I'll give that one. That was Frank Foley.
Oh, oh,
Yeah,
you might as well
yeah.
just stuck a 2x4 up my ass.
What did I
Oh
tell
my
you?
God, that name
You-
just. Oh,
I see him on occasion because he's like the loss prevention supervisor for Acme. So he's
tried to throw me out of the academy.
yeah, he tried to do some shit to me too, but it is what it is. He meant well.
Yeah.
He meant well.
So when you think about your life growing up in Norristown, and then you went off into the military and you went into the reserves, did some cool stuff that sort of opened your eyes into what you wanted to do.
Yeah.
You did the struggle to get hired, which most people do, especially, for people that don't understand how that works. For most people in the suburban Philadelphia area, you have to put yourself through the academy. There's very few places anymore. And even back then, there were not that many that would hire you without the academy and then send you to the academy on their dime.
Yeah.
So most people are investing in themselves, spending the $2,500, $3,000, whatever the academy costs, to put themselves through it, and then making themselves hireable for a police job. So you went through that process, and you clearly took one, threw one away with Phoenixville, and quite frankly, back then they were the lowest paid police department in Chester County and pretty much the entire state, for the department with their size. So I would have probably done the same thing. And you waited until the job that you've been in for 21 years becomes available.
Yeah.
You talked about the first 4 years of your career were rather eventful. My first year as a cop, I was picked up in a tornado and dropped. So
I remember that story.
We all have, and it's weird how, and nothing's been as exciting as, I've had a lot of exciting moments, but nothing is, I was like a 5-pump jump. Right. I was like, the hottest chick in the world. And I was 5 pumps and it was done. And that's what my career is 27 and a half years. And here I am. And all I got is first 9 months of the job, I get picked up in a tornado. So let's talk about your first few years in a job and the scares you had, because what happens when you have those scares, those moments that allow you to if you're lucky, reflect on
Mhm.
them, and then have a sort of a come to Jesus internally on your
Yeah.
humanity, on your um, legacy you want to leave, how you
Yeah.
want to impact the world. Because when you're young, you're six guns ablazing, man. You're just going full throttle. You
Mhm.
figure the world is your oyster, and you're just going to take as much as you can get. Let's
Yeah.
talk about your first 4 years on the job.
Um, I was, I'd venture to say my first 7 years were kind of tough because I had I pretty much got adopted by the sergeant that had the reputation of being a badass, and my squad were all young guys, and they were all badasses. Now, I'm not saying badasses like bad cops. I'm saying cops that didn't take any shit, cops that would follow the law, but they weren't the people you wanted to mess with. So I kind of got like lumped into that, um, which is okay because the guy that was my sergeant, Frank Pitts, he taught me to be a cop. He taught me how to be a real cop. Um, but that put, as far as I'm concerned, that put a huge smudge on my career, pretty much eliminating any chances of me getting promoted, which is why I'm 21 years on the job and still a patrolman as far as I'm concerned. Um, minus some, maybe a few disciplinary things, but that was years ago.
Right, right.
Um, but yeah, I mean, the first 4 years, I mean, talk about a learning experience. But the one that was like really scary was, I had well, it was like every 2 years, it was like something really eventful happened. So in 2002, I had that accident. I was actually going after a drug dealer who reportedly had a hidden compartment in the dashboard of his car, which will go back into the dark horse thing when we start talking about training. Um, so I was going after him, and a guy, not licensed, registration, nothing. I mean, he literally had nothing in his car. Crashed head on to me on North Valley Road, right where the train for the main line runs, and hit him head on, and sliced the back of my head open on a rifle muzzle, and gave me one hell of a case of mild traumatic brain injury. Um, got flown down the hospital of University of Penn, and took me months to get back as far as my head was concerned. I was suffering from headaches like every 45 minutes, that kind of stuff. Memory loss. I still have memory loss to this day because of it. But yeah, I mean, I remember laying in that helicopter, and I was trying to talk to the medic, and of course they can't hear you because they're listening to the pilot. God knows they're probably listening to like music. And I'm like, yo, and I was like scared. Here I am. I'm like in this helicopter, and I'm like getting flown to the hot. I don't know if I've got a brain bleed, that kind of stuff. Here's my wife. She's got, twins. She's pregnant. So scared the hell out of me, but I tell you what, I never felt better laying in that bed with my neck all like this. Um, and when my wife like leaned over and looked at me, and she was like, hi. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad like everything's okay, or as good as it could have been. But that did it kind of opened my eyes, like, yo, man, like this life ain't forever, and especially our job is risky as hell, you know. Nowadays, man, I couldn't even imagine trying to become a police officer now.
I would
These
tell
young
everybody
kids.
to find a different profession.
Yeah, I'm having that with one of my twins right now, trying to sway him from going that route. But kids, you ain't gonna tell them nothing.
No,
But
you're their
that,
idol. So
yeah. I mean, if my dad, which he never would have, but if my dad told me, no, I don't want you being a cop, I'd still done that shit.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, that was scary. Not as scary as my shooting, but it was scary.
Well, let's talk
Def-
about that.
well, you know how those kinds of things like stick in your head and you remember everything.
Yeah.
I used to do a presentation at Monco about my shooting, and it's like everything. September 9th, 2004, around 10 o'clock in the morning, you know, call goes out from a neighboring police department on a traffic stop. Jimmy Hutt stops a car on Lancaster Avenue. Next thing I hear on the radio is, you know, he's in a chase. There's a guy hiding in a trunk, and this is where they're heading. So, you know, I jump in my whip and balls to the wall, you know, because I was kind of close. And joined in a chase with my then Corporal Tim Brown. And as fate would have it, we got to this dead end road in Easttown, and Timmy made a right. And I looked to the left, and there was a farm road there. And I seen these guys like looking towards the farm, and I made the left and crested the hill and looked down and saw the Easttown cops like taking this female into custody. As I'm going down the tractor road, man, the car just starts driving away, and I'm like, the hell? So Mike Sescher's behind the car on this tractored road, and I got him behind Mike, and I kind of like looked ahead, and I could see like a post and rail fence. It's like a horse farm. There's like split rail fence there, and I'm like, this ain't gonna be good. Like this something's up with this dude. This is a bad dude. Not many people hide in the trunk of a car, you know. And I knew there was houses on the other side of that fence, and I was like, well, if it's gonna happen, let it happen out in this big field. So I drove off the tractored road, and I passed Mike Sescher. Figuring the guy was armed, I already drew my gun. I drove up on his passenger side. And it's funny because when I tell the story, it's like, you figure a horse pasture, you know, it's real bumpy. When I tell you, man, there must have been angels there, bro, because it was like smooth, like I was driving on glass. And I had my windows were already down because it was a nice, you know, September day. And I drove up next to the guy, and I had my gun across my chest like this. And I told him, I was like, yo, pull the fuck over, just stop. And he just real calmly just reached down on his seat and pointed his gun at me, and we shot simultaneously at each other. I say that because I saw the muzzle flash. His bullet, they never found it. They never found where it went. Mine hit him under his armpit, struck his aorta, and lodged in his rib cage. He went in front of me, and I had been trained by this guy, Steve Dentino. And we were taught to shoot through our windshield. So I slammed on my brakes, and I put 4 rounds through my windshield. And I hit his car 3 to 4 times, 2 through his back window. And he crashed into the fence. And Mike Sescher pulls up next to me, and he's like, are you okay? Because he saw my window come apart. And I was like, yeah, that's for me. And we just started screaming at the guy to get out of his car. Little did I know he's bleeding out. And everybody just rolled in. As everybody rolled in, this guy comes out, and he just points the gun at the chief of police, Tommy Armstrong from Easttown. God rest his soul. And all I heard was gun, 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 gun. And then we just emptied. I mean, I think I shot 10 times then. He got struck 8 times center mass. Some incidental stuff, like I guess by his leg and stuff. But I kept thinking to myself, it's like everything slowed down, you know, you're like, you get the tunnel vision. I never heard my gun go off. I just saw the recoil, and every time the front sight went across this center mass, I pulled the trigger, and it was slow motion to the point where you could actually see, like you could see the rounds hitting the guy. Because you get like what they refer to as hard focus. It almost feels like binocular vision.
Mm-hmm.
Like you zoom in. So yeah, he finally went down, and we went up to go clear the body. Jimmy Hutt was with me. Jimmy was smart because he had a long gun, and I still had a handgun. Didn't reload like a dumbass. I only had like 3 bullets left. I'll never do that again. And we went up, and Jimmy covered him through the window of the car, and I went around front to clear him. And I came, and I was like, if you move, I swear to God, I'll blow your brains out. And he had dropped the gun, but he made one last ditch effort to like reach for it. But you know, when you see somebody and they're dead, like their eyes, the way their eyes are. And Timmy Brown was moving up with Chief Armstrong's car. And I looked at him. I was like, yo, boss, he's dead. So they handcuffed him. We cleared the car. We found 120 grand in the trunk. He had robbed the Harleysville National Bank out past, like, I guess it's out past Royersford. He went down 422, ended up getting pushed off because there was a crash. So he got pushed on to 202. And then the girl, the getaway driver, she's like, she knew 30 would get her to Philly. Unfortunately, that's what happened. That came with its own different kind of thing. I mean, it's like you're dealing with cops that have never really experienced it. There's only been, I think, the ones that I know of, there were 2 shootings in Tredyffrin. None of them have ever been fatal. So this was like literally the first fatal shooting in Tredyffrin Township history. I know it was the first fatal shooting in Easttown. Police officer involved shooting. But it was hard. When it happened, I remember the emotion. And I went to my car, and I had an old clamshell Nextel. And I opened it up, and I called my wife, and I was like, listen, I was just in a shooting. The guy's dead. I'm okay. You're probably going to see it on the news soon. It's going to be a long day. I'll try to call you as soon as I could. And she was like, okay. And I closed that phone, and I literally went into the middle of this pasture, and I collapsed. I fell down on my knees, and I wept like a baby, because I think it was all the emotion of the shooting, mortality, the fact that, you know, you just took a human being's life. I didn't want to do that. A lot of things were going through my head, like, how's his mother going to feel? Does he have kids? You know, and not up and probably up until about 5 or 6 years ago did I finally realize that, you know, you need to get help if you're having problems with something like that. So I did, and I'm much better. You know, PTSD is real for cops. But yeah, man, that was crazy. It was definitely a life-changing experience. And other cops, they don't know how to handle it. I've had guys walk up to me and say, oh, yo, good job on that. I'm like, what? Like, it's not something to pat somebody on the back for. It's not something that I dreamt about. I was trained to do it. You know, I think I'd have never made that shot if I didn't go to SRT school, if I didn't become intimate with my firearm and know exactly where the bullet was going to go. Because they teach you there to point and shoot. Mm-hmm. Anything within 15 meters, I don't align sights. That front sight goes center mass, and, you know, I'm perforating. But yeah, that was crazy. And I thought to myself, I just became like a member of that 1% community, along with Timmy Brown and Jimmy Hutt. But it follows you. It follows you. Some guys, you know, they did great, and they went in promotion and all that stuff. And then, you know, me just I just kept being a cop, which is okay. Believe me. I love what I do.
Here's what I can tell you, because I've never been promoted, nor have I tried, but there's a couple things that I know about guys like us. Number one, we can ride solo and be okay. Mm-hmm. Like I'm good by myself or in a squad. Doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. We don't feed off of the power hungry trips
Mm-mm.
that people strive for in our profession.
Yeah.
And it's actually a negative. I won't get promoted ever, and I will choose to never get promoted ever, because I don't want to ever be in a position where I can't continue to be myself. I have an
Yeah.
autonomy within what I do as a cop. I follow the law. I'm highly trained. I'm very skilled at what I do,
Mm-hmm.
but I also have my own set of boundaries and rules that I don't want anyone else to infringe upon. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I prefer to be my own lone wolf in some respects. I'll back you up if you want to come out, but I really do enjoy having that autonomy to be me. And I think part of the reason why, whether it's subconsciously or not, that you haven't got promoted is because you truly do enjoy the freedom of not having that.
Restraint.
Yes,
Restrictions.
that are placed upon supervisors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think you wouldn't be doing what you do now with Dark Horse if you were a supervisor in any capacity.
No, that's yeah, you're absolutely right. I remember the last promotional process. It was something my wife and I thought long and hard about it, and I was not going to do it. And I was convinced by my now sergeant Kevin Moore, and he was like, "No, I think you got a real shot, Russ. You think you got a real shot?" And of course, I'm like, man, I don't know, bro. I got a lot of history, and history don't look well upon, Russ Hittle as a cop in my jurisdiction, which is okay. I'm okay with it, because people, I'd like to believe that the guys that I work with, they know when shit hits the fan that I'm going to be there, and I'm going to be cool about it. And if business needs to get handled, I'm going to be there to handle the business. There's some people that I don't feel that comfortable with. There's very few people that I would go into an active shooter with. Yeah. Well, I'm happy to say too, though, now we have really good cops. Not to say we didn't have good cops there before. I'm just saying, like, there's some really good cops there. A lot of vets that have seen combat, squared away individuals. I love my squad that I work with. And I haven't had any problems with the squad mates that I've had recently in the past. So, but I think a lot of that is out of luck on my part. Just being on the squads that I was lucky enough to be on. Yeah, there's just, I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying it to toot my horn. Like, I've done a lot of things. I joke, like, because we have this one. I have a wall down here in the trophy room that has like all my awards and stuff like that. I'm like, look, those self-stroking things, they're there for my grandkids. Like, when my grandkids come in, they'll see that stuff and they'll be like, oh, look, Grandpa used to be a cop. I won more freaking awards than I care to even think about. It's just, it is what it is. But I also know that there's lots of people, like, just like people that seek certain things, like they thrive on that. You know what I thrive on? I thrive on jumping on an airplane and going to a state and teaching a bunch of hard charging cops to go find really, really bad people. That's what I thrive on.
That's a great segue. Look at you. You should have your own fucking podcast, dude.
We should do this at least once every 6 months or something.
I agree. So let's talk about that. We both are entrepreneurs. I'm an entrepreneur in a different world than you are.
Mm-hmm.
You stayed within our profession. I did for a while with bodyguarding, but I found my niche in a different field of business. I'm not, you had asked me one time about my thoughts about coming in and joining the group, and my hunger for cop work has left me. So I wouldn't be helpful to anybody.
Right. I
could tell war stories over a glass of scotch with anybody.
Yeah.
But my drive and determination to train and teach is waned. What was the impetus for Dark Horse? Obviously, that's your passion is drug work and all the things you learn from doing drug work with hidden compartments and tells and things that happen when they're driving and all the things that you learn about that. But what was the impetus for Dark Horse?
Dark Horse started, and I will go to my grave with this. It was definitely ordained by God. I met two fantastic police officers, one from South Carolina and the other one from Tennessee at a training. They were actually my instructors. So in the process of the training, I think they saw my abilities in doing, hidden compartments, that kind of stuff. And we kept in touch. And one day, the guy from South Carolina was like, man, if we could take this piece of training and put this piece of training with it and make it affordable to cops, like, I think we can really do good. Well, guys like talking a lot. So I'm not a talker. Like, you're going to do this shit, jump on that horse and ride. So I ended up getting Lyme disease really bad. I had it like 5 years without being diagnosed. And it finally really got me, knocked me out of work for like 2 months. I had a line in my arm and stuff. It was crazy. So about a month in, Shannon just got pissed at me one time. She was just like, all right, listen, you know what? You're getting on my nerves. You keep talking about this training thing. Like, why don't you just sit down and start writing stuff? And in a month, I had a whole solid 8-hour program, PowerPoints, all kinds of stuff done. And I called them and I called these guys and I was like, yeah, we're doing this. And I did my first class in Horsham at the Marriott on 6/11. Had a hookup with a guy that got me a room for like $50, got me the conference room for $50 in the Marriott, bro. So that's what I keep saying is like, God was in this the whole time. And took the money that I got from that first class as the money was coming in. And I bought like an HD projector. I bought the sound system, got all my props together for the class, and it was kind of good. And then we did another class in South Carolina a few months later, and the name started, it was kind of getting out there because of some of the guys that were teaching with me. And man, I got on Facebook and just started cultivating it and just, a little bit here, a little bit there. Hey, listen, we're thinking about this stuff. And then the more and more I got into not drug interdiction, but criminal enforcement, I was like, yo, we could do credit cards, clone credit cards, because I'd made them cases, skimming devices. We could do all these different things that's lacking in criminal interdiction, because everybody says criminal interdiction, but what it really is drug and money interdiction.
Right.
And it was October of 2014 is when we got our LLC, and we taught our first class, I'm going to say May of 2015. And we've never looked back. I mean, I've taught as far west as Texas, as far northwest as Montana, as far south as Florida, and right now as far northeast as Connecticut, and a lot of places in between. At present, I have, or I should say we have, because Shannon and our co-owners, plus my buddy from Tennessee, he's my director of operations, Scott Owens. We've got instructors. We have an instructor in Washington State. We have an instructor in Texas. 3 instructors in Tennessee.
I know one of them.
What's that?
I know one of them.
Yeah, exactly. Marty Penny, instructor in Georgia, instructor in Louisiana, and we're still like, there's young criminal interdictors out there that are actually calling us, that are like, yo, I want to teach for Dark Horse. And I'm sure you've been to some trainings and stuff that are just like, it's a lot of cops speak, and like cops, look, I could cuss with the best of them. I don't like to do that in a professional setting, especially when I'm teaching. But every single one of my instructors, or our instructors, are all Bible believing Christians.
Right.
And that's something that they bring with them, because they like, that's part of us. And when we first started, I remember telling my one business partner, Toby, I said, yo, I'm really thinking about this Horsham class that I'm doing, like opening up with prayer. And you can't come to a Dark Horse class and not have like an incantation, like a prayer right before the class. Because look, man, I don't care what your religious, quote unquote, your religious beliefs are. I know there's a God. And the reason I know there is a God is because September 9th in 2004, I looked the devil in his eyes. I saw him. They were hollow, they were dark, and there was no soul there. And you know, if there's a devil, I know there's a God. And it's something that's stuck with us. Now, a lot of people are like, oh, you're pushing your religion on people. We never do that. You know, we're very respectful about that kind of stuff. But I think a lot of people understand where we stand when it comes to those kinds of things. But don't get it twisted. Those instructors are badasses and they'll take care of their business. I mean, you know, Marty, he loves God, but he'll whoop that ass. And he,
I can't even.
I love that man.
The largest man I know.
Yeah, he's a great dude, man. He's a great dude. But you know, we've had some, I mean, some really memorable students. And even when I was just teaching for, because I teach for the feds too. I teach for the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration in what they refer to as DIAP, which is a Drug Interdiction Assistance Program. It's actually where I got my certification from. And we would go and actually teach, but then ride with these dudes. And, you know, we went out on it was three of us. It was Jason St. Romain from Louisiana, and then Chris Green. And we went out with these guys from Mississippi, and we were in George County, Mississippi, the poorest county in the state. And the last stop of the night, I had a corporal stop a tractor trailer, and we ended up getting like over $100,000 in stolen electronics on its way out to Las Vegas. And it was all like interdiction. I mean, it's just, it's, I love it. Like I live it, I breathe it. I get students, even students from back in 2015 that'll call me, man. And they get me started talking about that stuff. I mean, it's just my passion.
Well, one thing I like is on like your social media, and you can tell when you have a good business and that people bought in and that they're actually using the shit that they learn in training in their real life. Because that's, you know, firearms and tactics and SWAT were my thing. And being able to show somebody how to shoot well and somebody how to shoot on the move and not necessarily shoot fast, but shoot effectively, and you know, slow is smooth, smooth is fast.
Yeah.
All those principles I loved. And with you, I see on social media where guys that attend your class are posting photos of their stops when they find something. And I love how you guys openly and willingly accept criticism of each other. And somebody will point out, oh, maybe next time try doing this, or hey, if you see that again, look out for this, or whatever. And I think that the brotherhood that you've created within your community of Dark Horse is actually really inspiring, because it shows that what you're doing is actually working. There's a lot of trainers out there that train and it's a one-off, and those people, you never hear of them again. They're just taking your cash and they're putting out something that might be useful in 1 out of 100 times, but they're taking your cash. And then there's others that are actually fully invested like you, who are creating a family. And it's an integrated, integral, woven web of family that are from all different, you know, cities, rural counties, and everything in between. And everybody has the same passion for stopping bad people from doing bad things.
I always joke with folks. I mean, obviously you and I are in the same fraternity, but if it wasn't for that fraternity, there's no state in the union, including Alaska, that I couldn't go and have a place to lay my head.
Yep.
Because my students, or our students, they're fantastic, and they know that they can call us if they make a stop. In the beginning of Dark Horse, like my phone would ring at all hours of the night, and I would do my best to help. And if I couldn't help, I would get somebody else that could. Now my instructors have taken that burden from me, because Mrs. Hittle doesn't like when the phone rings in the middle of the night. But I can't say enough. I am so proud of the guys and gals that we trained. When they make a stop or a seizure, it wouldn't have been better if I made it. like, I just love the fact, you know, and they get excited and they hear them excited about their stop, or if they saw a change in driving behavior, and then they start talking about all the behavioral cues that we talk about, and the verbal cues, and, you know, signs of deception, and that, it gets me excited. Like, I'm literally excited right now. Like, I'm going to work. I have to go to work at 9. Like, I'm thinking to myself, man, like, I'm trying to think of what sector I'm working tonight. Am I going to be able to get up on the highway and do some interdiction? But, you know, with that though there's also adversity that comes with that. So everybody sees the seizures and they get all excited, right? Everybody likes, like, they like trophy shots. Trophy shots are not one of the things that are not allowed on our page. If you put a trophy shot up, you better be explaining how you got it. And when I say how you got it, you know, you've got to go from the change in drive behavior to all the behavioral cues, travel plans, what happened on your roadside interview. Did you locate a compartment? What did you see when you were going to a particular body panel? Otherwise, it gets deleted. So there's lots of posts that come through us. The guys are just like, yo, I grabbed this the other day. And it's like some guy with like 16 kilos. Well, guess what happens? It gets deleted. I sent him a message. Yo, you got to give us synopsis. Otherwise, it's not going to be on my page. And the guys are usually cool with it. Some guys are assholes and they usually get booted. But it's so cool. Like, it's so cool to, like, go to these states and teach these guys and just see how excited they get when we start talking about behavior. And then we play our videos because, you know, it's one thing for me to tell you about what I've seen and what I've done. But when you see a video of an officer and they're going through the steps, and on a traffic stop, you're talking to a guy on the roadside, and the guy's, he's nervous to the point where he has vagal stimulation and he goes into bradycardia and passes out on the roadside. Well, it's one thing for me to tell you, hey, listen, you know, you can get somebody so stressed to the point where they pass out. Oh, yeah, by the way, here's a traffic stop. And you show them and they're like, holy crap, you know? Right. And then everything we talk about is there's at least one video piece of evidence that we can show them on that. And it keeps everybody engaged. But I think too, the other things that we offer really draws people to Dark Horse because, you know, you could say, case in point, there was individuals, and I've seen them on a bunch of different posts and pages. They were chasing these 3 guys from Sinaloa, Mexico, in this car. It was registered out of Sinaloa. They were chasing this car all over the country, and the guys kept stopping it. Well, when they stopped it, they're like, the only thing we keep finding is these new clothes. There's like clothes with tags on them. And they're like, I must have missed it, or they must have got rid of the load. And I'm like, finally, I'm just like, yo, the clothes are the load. And they don't understand, because then we start talking about organized retail theft, which is something that we talk about and we train. And it kind of goes by their way. They're like, what's organized retail theft? And, you know, when you get a phone call from like Ass Bumble Screw, Montana, which happened, and this guy's like, yo, you're not going to believe this, but I just hit this girl. She's part of a 6-state organized retail theft ring. And I got her with all kinds of stuff. And she's got like a shit ton of felonies now. Like, it's like something this guy would have never done because he didn't know. Right. You know, you're not going to find it unless you know what to look for. But
the thing I like about it is it's a resource that most departments don't have internally. And there's very few training opportunities locally that would have someone with your breadth and your instructor's breadth of knowledge to be able to impart on these very hungry cops who are willing to absorb and learn and then go out and practice. And I think that's one of the coolest things about your business that you know, I'm impressed by. Well, we could do this all goddamn night. We could just sit here and shoot the shit. If I had a bottle of scotch, I'm pretty sure we'd be here all night.
You're right.
But let's do this. We're gonna end the show. I'm gonna have you give all your information as far as your website and all that kind of stuff, where people can find information about you. We're gonna have you back on again in a couple months. We'll do this all over again and talk about shit that we didn't talk about. We'll maybe share some Marty Penny stories. Because
Maybe
that's
we
why,
got Marty Penny on.
yeah, well, first of all, we got to bring his vernacular up to something that us up north of the Mason-Dixon line can understand.
That's part of the best part of him.
I'm just worried about whether or not we're going to have subtitles.
I'll translate for him.
All right. Well, yeah, he's my roommate. I can translate too.
Yeah, there you go.
But listen, I'm glad we finally got this done. I'm glad
Absolutely,
that we were able to share what you do, because there's a lot of cops that listen to the show. I'm sure you're going to get some people reaching out. But where can they reach you? What is your website? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So instead of like busting out, if you go into Google and type in Dark Horse Law Enforcement Training, you'll find us. If you go into Facebook and you look up Dark Horse Law Enforcement Training, you'll find us, but that's our public site. If you want to get onto the page in which you're referring to, where the officers are sharing their information, that's referred to as Dark Horse Associates. That's another name that we do business under. It's Dark Horse Associates group page. You're going to have to answer some questions to get in. My moderators, they take care of all that stuff. Yeah, or you can, give me a call, but they got to call you to get my number, bro. I don't give it.
I'm not giving that out. I'm not giving that
out. But yeah. Our website's up and running, and you can do everything on there. You get classes. There's even some video stuff on there. So if you want to watch videos, they're on there.
Awesome. I'll put your website in the show notes. I'll put them on when I do social media posts. I'll put the website on there to all the Facebook groups, all that kind of stuff. So
cool,
people
man.
will be able to figure out where you're at and what you're doing and how to get a hold of you.
Cool, man. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk tonight. I really do appreciate it.
It was awesome. Glad we did. Don't go anywhere. I'm going to close out the show.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody, for watching this episode of the 2 Dates and a Dash podcast. I am your host, Matt Cubbler. Thank you again to the amazing, incomparable, the amazing finder of shit that you think you're hiding, Russ Hittle, and his company, Dark Horse, and all the instructors that work for him. They're out there doing good work. Police work gets a bad stain today. People think that we're just out there trying to go out and mess with people and kill people. All we're really trying to do is keep you safe. And part of that is getting bad people off the street who are trying to hide their badness. And sometimes it's not out in the open for everyone to see. And there are people like Russ who are out there finding them and getting the drugs and other illegal things they're doing off the street. So we are not your enemy. We are your friend. We are your ally, and we can be trusted. So everybody, thank you. God bless, and go out and be kind to one another.